Good afternoon. My name is Tyesha Smith, and I will be doing a presentation about reading and the benefits of small group instruction and intervention. So, I began by collecting some reading data, and our school as a whole showed that there was a need for improvement in reading. However, I did conduct a survey among teachers in grades K through 5, and teachers in grades 2 through 5 felt that their students lacked the foundational skills that were necessary to benchmark on their reading assessments. So there were major inconsistencies where grades were concerned and the reading data was concerned in first grade. So no students were failing reading when it came to their grades. However, 30 out of 53 students were not able to meet the requirements to test out of STAR early literacy. And so, according to the middle of the year data, about 65% of first graders were below grade level in reading, despite the fact that there were no students failing reading. And this table is a collection of the data from those students that were not able to test out of STAR early literacy as far as the middle of the year. And so subgroups are highlighted. Those students that show in EL and SPED are also included in the racial breakdown of students. So there were 3 black students, 23 white students, and 4 students that were considered other when it came to their racial identity. And so when we look at the table, there was a necessary scaled score of 775 in order for them to test out of STAR early literacy, and the student growth percentile that we were looking at was just 50%. So out of those 3 black students, there were none that were able to get past that 775 scaled score. And there were 2 students that did not show the 50% growth that we were looking for. There were 13 white students that were not able to show the necessary growth that we were looking for, and then 3 out of 4 other students that were unable to show that growth percentile. So then when we look at the actual STAR reading data, these are students that were able to get past STAR early literacy and move on to the actual reading assessment. And once again, when we look at this data, the subgroups are highlighted, and the table just indicates the students that are below the benchmark goal. And once again, these EL and SPED students are also included in the racial breakdown of students as well. So some students may have met the benchmark goal for growth percentile in early literacy, but they still did not meet the goal of a scaled score of 775 to move on to test and STAR reading. And so the grade equivalency for the benchmark was 1.4, and then the percentile ranking we were looking for was 65% growth. So there were no black students that were able to test and STAR reading because they did not move out of STAR early literacy. There were 18 white students and 5 other students that were able to test. And so 5 out of 18 students did not meet the grade equivalency, and those 5 also did not meet the percentile ranking that we were looking for. There were 2 out of 5 other students that did not meet the grade equivalency, and they also did not meet the percentile ranking. So there were no EL students that were able to get past STAR early literacy, and then there were 2 SPED students. And then when we look at the overall, there were 23 overall students that were able to get past STAR early literacy to move on to STAR reading. But we look at this data and we still see that students are below benchmark. This is where we look at the Dibbles data for the middle of the year. And so those goals were 60 for letter naming fluency, 43 for phoneme seg fluency, 54 for nonsense word fluency, 17 for word reading fluency, and 35 for oral reading fluency. And so once again, we have our breakdown of our 3 black students, 41 white students, and then 9 other students. Once again, EL and SPED are included in these racial subgroups as well. And so we are able to look at this chart and just see the number of students and percentage of students that were not able to meet their goals for their Dibbles middle of the year data. And so when we look at all of that collective data, there are still major inconsistencies between reading assessment data and then reading grades among first grade students. So once again, there were no students that were failing reading, but as we just saw in the data that was collected, there were a lot of students that were still not meeting those reading goals. So our plan was to focus on improving the implementation of meaningful reading small groups and intervention. So this will help to minimize the gaps in reading proficiency and ensure that students are prepared to move on to the next grade level. So the attention for reading small group and intervention lessons was on phonemic awareness and phonics. So that is just that foundational level to just really focus and help students master those foundational skills in order to bring up their scores on reading assessments. So some of the research that we found based off of reading best practices, there was a common theme for young readers in the importance of phonemic awareness and phonics. And so that is why I chose to really focus on those 2 areas. So phonemic awareness just focuses on the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate the sounds of language. And so most phonemic awareness tasks are oral tasks, whereas phonics, it focuses on the relationship between sounds and written language in order to teach learners how to read. It has been stated that if students have enough understanding of letters and their connections to sounds, then they will be able to read by applying those skills to decode words. So some of the teaching techniques that are listed as being meaningful and successful, and these are just great ways to ensure the success of students during reading small groups or intervention. So these can also be applied to phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, and or comprehension lessons. And some of these techniques include excavate error, which is where you dig into errors, studying them efficiently and effectively to better understand where students struggle and how you can best address those points. So you would just assess students to figure out their strengths and weaknesses, and then you would plan lessons to be able to focus on their areas of weakness. So some students may need a focus on letter sounds, blends, vowel teams, long vowels, fluency, or comprehension. You just would assess each student one-on-one to determine where their strengths or their weaknesses lie. Another technique is called at bats, and so this just says that because succeeding once or twice at a skill won't bring mastery, you give your student lots and lots of practice mastering knowledge or skills. So you allow students to have additional practice beyond their small groups and intervention lessons. So you would provide meaningful resources during independent reading and other centers that go along with the skills that are being taught for each student. Another technique is it's called Every Minute Matters. And so that just encourages teachers to really respect students' time by spending every minute productively. So, this kind of removes those habits of giving busy work as time fillers. You can practice skills during bathroom breaks and transitions, and there are multiple ways to do that and games that you could do during those times. Another thing that is important is the differentiation in reading. So, differentiation is just tailoring instruction to meet individual needs. Teachers can differentiate content, process, products, or the entire learning environment. So, there are several ways to differentiate. This includes various reading levels. So, accelerated reader is a great way to accomplish this, where students can read books on their levels and take tests to assess their comprehension. And teachers are able to set their students' reading ranges to ensure that they're not testing on books that are too easy or too complex. Teachers can also give tiered assignments. And so this is just where teachers take the objective or standard that students are working on, and that objective will remain the same. However, the complexity of the assignment will vary. So, for example, if the focus is comparing and contrasting two texts on the same topic, the difficulty of the texts that are being compared and the task required will vary depending on the level of the learner. So, for example, although it's first grade, if I have a student that is reading early first grade books, their assignment is going to reflect their reading level. Whereas if I have a student that's able to read second grade books, their assignment is going to be the same standard, but a task that is a little more complex, to make sure that they are still showing growth, although they are above grade level. Another important thing for teachers, or another important way for teachers to differentiate, is flexible grouping. So it's important to assess students and group them according to their learning focus and levels. That way, groups will remain flexible throughout the year, because I may have someone that starts below grade level, however, they may show an exponential amount of growth. And so, groups need to remain flexible, because that student that goes from working in a lower group may move into one of the high groups. And so, basically, groups remain flexible and fluid throughout the school year, because students will move based off of their learning levels and growth. And so, in conclusion, this is just some best practice. These are just some best practice and differentiation videos that can be accessed. And so, best practice is this is a video called From the Lettered Classroom: How to Phonics Instruction. So it's a video that shows how to really practice meaningful phonics instruction with students. There is a video from the Center for Collaborative Classroom about small group reading a small group reading lesson, and how a teacher differentiates her students. And then there's also a SIPS intervention lesson, and these are actual resources that are used in our school. So these are some videos that there are lots of videos for teachers to access in order for them to be successful and have that visual demonstration of what it looks like, what meaningful instruction, small group instruction, what meaningful intervention looks like, what are some best practices in education. And so this data we used the middle of the year data, and after implementing these things, we will be able to see student growth we are hoping to see student growth by the end of year data. And so we will be able to determine what really worked, and we're able to work with individual teachers to really help them implement these practices in their classroom. And once we do this, we're hoping that our students show growth over time, and that those inconsistencies will minimize. Whereas if a student is really struggling, then we will see the consistency in a failing reading grade and low reading data if they are truly struggling, or if they're truly mastering those standards. Once this is put into practice, we will be able to see where students are passing reading and are also showing growth and passing those end of year reading assessments or just reading assessments throughout the entire school year. So I hope that you enjoyed this presentation. And once again, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, I am here to answer that for you. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye.